Pentoresco. I write stuff, podcast, illustrate. I just dabble. I just dabble in everything and everything. And my guest is the one and only Katrina Archer. So, Katrina, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Like I said, very serious all the time. Super, super serious. So you write stuff too. You edit stuff, and you do all kinds of
Yep.
other things as well. So, what's your secret, all-powerful origin story?
Origin story.
Yeah.
I don't know. In what way? I mean, I don't. I've never really thought of myself as having an origin story,
Well,
kind of like
we
a
all, we all.
superhero, you know.
Well, so I see. I have a couple theories. Well, one, first off, I am deliberately stealing this from William Holland. I just goes interviewed for on his show, and he goes, "What's your origin story?" So I thought, I just told him whatever came to my mind. I'm a wandering writer. I travel. I see the world. I'm a little crazy, and I just chase my dreams. But that's who I am. So that's how I see myself, and that's how I approach the writing business. So you, right, have your own approach. So basically, I mean, you came into this your own way. So how did you do it?
Yeah, I've always been a writer ever since I was a little kid, but I also really liked the sciences. So I wound up when I was in school having like this weird pairing of wanting to do both tracks, but not really having enough time to do both. So I wound up focusing on engineering for a very long time and had a great engineering job. And when I was about 35, my grandmother. My origin story is actually my grandmother because she went, "When are you going to get back to the writing?" And that's when I started to seriously write again. And I got into it. I had a great job where they let me work part-time hours so I could focus on doing a little bit more of the writing stuff. And for years and years and years, I worked part-time and wrote, and that's how I managed to get 2 novels going because I just had a little bit of extra time. And then I got into the editing because I gave my book to a beta reader, and she was like, "Well, this is some of the cleanest copy I've ever read." And I realized that, you're always telling writers to diversify your income streams. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a business I can start here with editing. So I took some continuing education classes to make sure my grammar and stuff was up to snuff. Did some extra schooling and started a freelance editing business.
Well, no, I mean it's what we all need to do. This for me is kind of how I'm diversifying. I'm very close to being a Twitch affiliate, and so I'll be very shortly, going to that point where it's like, hey, you know what? I'm actually going to be making money doing these things on a regular basis. So I'm very close to that. But I also, I mean, one of the other things I've realized too is that writers, honestly, what we're guilty of is the fact is we usually come up with this amazing content and we don't utilize it to the degree we should. We all have skills we bring to the table. Some of them are unique. Some of them, like you're naturally a great editor. I'm naturally good with like dialogue and talking my ass off. So so finding stuff that actually tailors to those strengths is a big part of what I think is writers don't do that enough. It's something I recognize. Like if we're talking strictly the business of writing, right? We do not. I think the biggest thing writers are guilty of is simply the fact that our skills are a lot more diverse doing what we're doing, because what we're doing is essentially we're constructing a presentation. And it's not that different in engineering in one sense that we're taking a concept and we're bringing it to life. Now our materials are different. We're using language instead of actual materials to build something, but it's still we are creating something from essentially an idea. That's powerful, and I think we honestly take that for granted.
Yeah, I was actually really struck when I was writing because I was a software engineer by trade, how similar the process was between putting together a book and plotting it out and then actually creating a working software program and keeping all those moving parts working together.
It's language, like software engineering, like no matter what, so whether it's you're programming a video game or whether you're creating a tool or whether you're creating a process, they're the same tools. It's just the results you're going for are different, right? A video game player is trying to create an interactive experience. A sometimes the tool you make helps improve that interaction between the user and the interface. Sometimes it's something completely different, right? Heck, you can create like a virus that says happy birthday. I mean, if you really, really want to, I've seen it done. And but it's all language. It's all in the language and the intent of what you're creating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's also I find the act of being in the zone when you're working. It's very similar. They're both very creative fields. Like, a lot of people don't feel that engineering might be it fires the same size of your brain, but I've actually felt they're very similar processes for me. When I slip into them, you can actually scare me quite badly if you sneak up on me while I'm writing or when I was coding, because I would lose myself.
What you're talking about is there's a rhythm. Like I think it's not just creativity. I think it's everything. There's a rhythm to everything. And a lot of times what we do when we get started in any process, doesn't matter what it is, right? There's that initial, okay, what the hell am I doing? Right? And then there's that moment where we just let ourselves do something. Yeah, T. Phillips, SSD. Yeah, multi-skilled tech creative folks. Yeah, we totally are the future. Actually, we're the present, dude. We are absolutely the present, Tony. How you doing? Simply because, frankly, you have to be in this day and age. We all are Renaissance men and women. It's the absolute truth of today, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty much I started the Little Blue Marble magazine, which is my climate fiction magazine, and I'm a one woman show over there. I do all the web maintenance. I do all everything on it.
Well, it's just like me. Like, oh shoot, I forgot to hit that button. All right, let's hit now. It's just like me. I tend to look. I mean, I'm recording this episode in both audio and visually. I don't really edit the video too much here unless I'm asked to, but. Right, but I'm making clips. I'm creating, and I'm narrowing stuff down on the other video, and then on the audio, I'm doing the same thing. I'm editing it. I'm compressing it, putting it together. I'm making the sound as pretty as possible, as much as I can, or as and I'm releasing content all the time. And that's my engineering aspect of it. And then, but creatively, I mean, I'm writing novels. I'm creating stories, and we do this all the time. Like, we do this absolutely all the time. And they're not different. I think the thing is one of the things I've realized as I've done this more and more and more, the science of art and the art of science, they are actually two sides of the same coin. It's just one. I think the starting point's different sometimes, but the process is almost the exact same.
Yeah, they're all interesting, endeavors, and I find that I like having my hands in both pies, because I'm one of those people who has a short attention span. So it helps to have that's actually why I like writing so much, because every time you write a story, it's new and it's different. You're never exploring the same topics. You're always trying something new, whether it's a new technique or a new plot device or different kinds of characters or a separate world. It just I think that's what attracts me to writing, because there's always a new problem to explore.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things about so this is what I find. I mean, this is, I don't know where you're at in the process. Like, we all start here. Our ideas start here, but turn our good stories into great stories. And I imagine this is even true in programming, right? It's when you kind of have something here, like something that you really want to say. I find that there's a divide between head and heart when we start creating stuff. And as we get better or more nuanced in practice, there's almost like we're more comfortable giving a part of ourselves to whatever creation we put into. And that, I mean, I think that's part of that rhythm we find. Sometimes when we get started, we're hesitant, we're self-conscious because we know we're not necessarily good, or we're not necessarily doing something. And then once we get into the rhythm of what we're doing, it's just a matter of practice and execution.
Yeah, it's also, I find there's a lot of work to be done Like when I started out with my first book, I got 25 pages into it and realized I had no idea what I was doing or how to even write a book. And I nearly gave up right then and there, just because the whole process, I just got completely stuck with where do I even go from here? And so I went out and took, a course in outlining, and that got me to the next phase and allowed me to get the book written. Now, was it a great book? No, but then I learned how to edit, right? Like I learned how to redraft and, work on, creating tension in the story. Like I actually went out, there are resources you can get and to learn to make your skills better, even more than just the creative process itself. There's an actual craft that you have to build before you can, get good as a creative person. Like any creative field, right? You practice, you get better.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like I'm illustrating, right? And I've been trying to teach myself how to illustrate, and I've been very fortunate. I've had some great people come on my show, and we've been drawing together, which has been amazing to be a part of. But the first thing, like one of the things the very first lesson I got on the show was that if you look at illustration from the point of view of the sum of shapes, right? The sum of what shapes are, and hold on a second here. I'm just doing something really quick while we get this rolling. That way, in the event, in these talks on Facebook, we can actually interact with them as well. And that's this. Like, it's about learning how to seeing like the whole thing and being able to break it down into smaller pieces. Because I don't think anything's really impossible, but it's a matter of being able to look, like, no matter how big your goals are, or no matter what kind of story you're creating or program, if you look at it from a whole, it's like, oh shit, how do I do that? But then you're like, okay, but if you look at it from this perspective, how do I get there? Right? And can you break down the steps of getting there? That sounds like plotting a novel. That sounds like plotting a program. That sounds like, achieving a goal. It sounds like it's all the same thing. It's knowing how to break down big concepts into tiny steps, because most of us can get there in tiny steps, bit by bit by bit by bit. It's when we tend to think like you probably could have kept going if you didn't stop and really realize, like, oh, what the hell am I doing? Like, you stop, or you were in that rhythm and you were in that zone and you created something. But then what happened is, like, you came up for air. It's like, oh shit, I'm in this deep water and I don't know where to go from here. How did I get here? Where am I going from here? You didn't have that, so you had to go back. It's like, go back to shore. Go, okay. And then you got back to that deep water again. It's like, okay, I'm here. This is where I need to be now. I need to go to this step, to this step, to this step, to this step. A lot of art, a lot of like science, a lot of actually any kind of critical thinking and problem solving is looking at where you are at and the steps you need to take to get to the next place, whatever that is.
Yeah, then there's also there's a certain fun in just winging it.
Yes. There's a point where you just gotta say fuck it. Like, there is that point. Like we you can look up all the techniques. You can seek what the master sought in terms of knowledge, but sooner or later, you're gonna have to go back to action. So, your grandmother. So, that's actually something I wanted to ask you. Why'd you stop writing? Like, when your grandmother had to give you that boot in the butt to go back into it, like it's just you didn't have room, or you just not?
I didn't have time. Like I basically had a full-time job. It was a job with long hours. It was a job that took up a total, like, almost all of my mind share. And then I went and got an extra degree. And then when I came back, like, the job was, working at usually at least 60 hours a week, like, just on the job, and sometimes longer. So it really wasn't, there really wasn't any time for doing the writing. But it was also, I guess, I just sort of, you can wind up pushing off things you want to do for a long time and then never getting back to them. And I realized, I needed an actual kick in the pants to make the time because a lot of people say, I don't have the time, right? A lot of people will go, oh, I'd love to write a book, I just don't have the time. And so then it was figuring out how to make that time. And so I was still working full time when I started that book. And, you know, I'd write a few hours here, a few hours there, you know, I'm not one of those write every day kind of writers. But it was a question of making the time to do it. And then once I decided that, yes, this is something I really did want to pursue, it was trying to figure out how to organize my life around how to make even more time to do that and still be able to feed myself.
Well, so I remember, like, for me, when I was in my 20s, I remember I was working 2 jobs. I was working pretty close to the hours you were working, not quite 60, but pretty close. And so there would be days when, like, I literally would have 15 minutes to write. That's it. But I took advantage of it. It was just 15 minutes. But it's like, you know what? It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And one of the things I realized right then and there is that there's no such thing as I don't have time. There's definitely days you're not going to feel it. There's definitely days you're going to be too tired to go. But when push really comes to shove, if you really want to do something, you'll find a way to do it, right? No matter what that is. And anytime I hear I don't have time, I honestly think it's the biggest excuse. Now, that doesn't mean I get it. Like, you have other responsibilities, but you don't even have 5 minutes in a day. It's like, okay, I never buy that anymore.
Yeah. So anyway, it was all about making the time and figuring out how to make the time, and that's what I started doing. Right. So.
Yeah. So it sounds like the writing led to editing, which is cool. But so I'm going to ask this: which one do you enjoy more?
Oh, I definitely enjoy writing more, and I actually actively dislike redrafting my own work. I think that's probably a skill I need to work on a little bit more. Although I'm not precious about my work. You know, I know when it's crappy and needs to be fixed. It's that short. It's more that short attention span thing where it's like, oh, I've seen this before. I have to like go over it again and again and again to tweak it. But there are some people who are the opposite. They will constantly tweak their work and never put it out there. Whereas I want to sort of get things out there as quickly as I can and move on to the next thing. But I really like it, like that whole, when you're diving into a new work and you've got a fresh idea, and writing things down is part of the fun part I enjoy. And what I tend to do now is, like, I don't outline as much as I used to when I was starting. I've gotten to the point where I don't need to rely on that as much. So I don't think I'm what they call a pantser. But I do, I plot out the story in my head almost before I tell myself little daydreams before I'm going to sleep. And usually, like, the night before I'm doing the work, then the next day I'll go and write that scene because I've pretty much worked it out in my head how it's going to go.
I call you, like, I kind of do something similar. I call myself a planter, because the honest truth is I usually have an idea of where the end of the story is. I know where the start of the story is, and I have some idea where the journey goes, right? But sometimes in the middle of the story, I'll add something that I'm like, okay, that's cool. I need to go back to the beginning now, make sure this actually makes sense, right, at some point. And I discover these cool little things, and basically I'm saying, like, me and you, it sounds like you write for some reason. I write, you enjoy the discovery of where your work takes you.
Yeah. I also like having something to say normally. Like, if I can have a story that has, a great plot, but if I lose interest in it, it's usually because I haven't figured out what it is I'm actually trying to say with that story. Like, it's just an adventure for the sake of the adventure, or is there actually something I'm actually trying to say in commentary about the world when I'm writing?
So when you do commentary about, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So when you do commentary about the world, is it commentary about the world, or is it something you care about, or is it both?
It's kind of both. Like I did the last book that I completed, and I haven't published it yet, talks a lot about, you know, misogyny, because that's a thing that has interested me as a woman who's worked in a lot of male-dominated fields and seeing, you know, various different types of ways that women get treated. And the character in this story goes through a lot of, not things that I have personally been through, but that I've seen other women have to try to cope with. And so that was I felt it was important when I was writing it to sort of have a commentary about those things. And that's why and it's been in the news a lot lately because of, you know, for various reasons like Me Too and all that kind of stuff. But especially as a woman in the games industry and seeing, you know, with how the whole Gamergate thing went down, there's a lot of, there's a lot of stuff that I, you know, want to, you know, you're working through in your headspace about how to tackle that and how to, you know, my relationship as a person to that environment. How do you know, that comes out in the story and the way the character deals with things.
So what video games do you play? If you don't mind my asking, do you play video games?
No, I don't really play very much. I tend to get queasy when I'm like, I can't play first person shooters because they usually make me ill. So if I play any games, they're usually much slower. But I don't play them because if I did, I would probably not do anything else. I have a little bit of an addictive personality, and so when I get into a game, I have to finish it. But no, I tend to do a lot more reading and TV watching than video games.
So yeah, I gave up television watching for video games. Like I don't watch any TV really anymore. I do watch it once in a while. If I hear a series I really like, I'll go binge it. But it's very rare I do that because it's like I'm like you. I'm in the sense of like, I really need to play this game, or I really need this show. And I've decided that I need to play this game. It's more important to me than I want to watch the show. So I barely see television anymore. I think I'm better off for it, but to be honest, because
I also found that video games is a really expensive habit to get into. You know, you've got the consoles, and then the actual games themselves aren't very cheap, and so there were a lot of other things I wanted to spend my money on.
No, and that's fair. I mean, I would tell you that actually video games are incredibly cheap now. Like honestly, for like my computer, I turned into a little bit of a video game console during the pandemic. It cost me. To start, it cost me $12, and it cost me $12. Like Steam is an amazing thing, and now that I've told you that, don't blame me if you go. It costs, but it's all really costly. You can get a lot of free games or $1 games if you really want to. There are some more expensive games there as well, but the best thing is a lot of these companies will offer deals on these games too. So I think I've spent maybe $100. I got like 20 games. I got plenty to do for a while, right? And that's a pretty good. That's cheaper than television is, right? So or at this point, so it's like I'm in. Oh God, I'm never not going to be out ever again. So like I question the sanity of me, you know, downloading Steam, but at the same token, I just like in this time you need something to do. And I really didn't want to binge watch every show on the planet because, frankly, like I can't you don't have like attention, like you have an ADD. For me, television's my ADD. I can't do it anymore.
Well, I don't think I have ADD. I just have I'm a dabbler.
Yeah, I get you. No, I totally get that. So what else do you dabble in? I imagine you're exploring other things as well, especially in a time like this.
Well, right now we're in the tail end of a 3-year renovation of our house that we gutted down to studs. So I was doing a whole lot of DIY renovation work alongside the contractors, doing a lot of staining and sanding and those types of things. And now that all the heavy lifting is done, I'll probably actually be sewing. for like, because I'll be reupholstering furniture, and I like to repaint furniture as well, like old furniture. I do some chalk painting and things like that make upcycling furniture. So that's totally different from writing or gaming or whatever. But it's a nice physical hobby, playing with my hands.
Well, no, it's a different. It stimulates the brain in different ways. Like I write by hand sometimes, especially with my longer books. I tend to write by hand. I find that it stimulates my brain differently than when I'm typing. Right? I mean, I enjoy it when I hear the keys. I'm a tactile person. I enjoy when I hear the keys clack. I enjoy it when I feel myself interacting with an interface of some kind. And the paper, I like the sound of it. And that's a big thing. It just hits the brain a different way, and I can see things differently. And when I write something and when I go to type it, it's almost like I did 2 drafts in one. Right? Instead of doing a redraft, now I'm taking all the stuff that was like, oh, this is a hot mess. Now what do I do with this? Right? It's like, no, I find the pieces I really like. I can do some editing here and there, and then I can go back, and if I need to do a redraft. Now I've gotten even a little bit more sophisticated with it, because now I've learned a lot from my first novel to my second novel, which I'm working on right now. So it's almost like I had reinvented my style, and it was like it's evolved quite a bit from book 1 to book 2. So I mean, how about you? Like did you go through a big leap process from your first book to your second, and your second to however many you're at now?
Well, I'm not a longhand writer. I kind of admire people who can do that. And I have a friend who actually writes longhand on his iPad, and he doesn't have to transcribe anything anymore because it just automatically, does the handwriting to text thing. But I just actually can't physically write with a pen that quickly enough. Like, I'm a much faster typist now than I am a longhand writer, and so like I find that writing longhand slows me down too much. I want to get to the next paragraph, but I'm still writing down the first one. Whereas typing, I can almost type as fast as I think, so I can get what I'm thinking onto the page really, really quickly. And so that process, I do sometimes print out drafts to read through them and do line edits, and seeing the words on the page. Like I actually will do a lot of reading of the book outside of the writing program, whether it's still on the screen or I've printed it out. I like to format it the way a book looks and sort of read it that way and see how it's working on the page when I'm redrafting. Because you can just see things differently.
Yeah, no, like it's important to look at it in as many different ways as possible, right? And that's a big part of the craft, is because you need to, like, I know it sucks for me to admit this, but sometimes my shit stinks, and I have to be very blunt about it. It's like sometimes you're not as good as you think you are, but so you seeing it from as many.
So do you read your stuff out loud?
Yes.
That's something I haven't done a whole lot of, and I need to do more of. But I'm always embarrassed because like I'm not the only person in the house, especially during the pandemic. You're sharing a house. It's just weird to be talking to yourself.
Well, but you're not. What you're doing is, okay. So I look at dialogue a little differently than most people, because for 2 reasons. I read comics, and I do this. Right, I have a pretty good ear for dialogue at this point, and I understand, like, I have really 2 rules to dialogue. Right, if you can't make it sound realistic, make it sound concise, which is a really, really good piece of advice for any writer doing dialogue. If you don't know how to make it real, make it short and sweet, because the shorter and sweeter it is, the better it sounds when you read it out loud when it's dialogue. That's the first rule. The second rule is with writing dialogue, ditch the "how are you" stuff. Hi, how are you? Good. You? Good. No one wants to read that shit. No one does. Right? So, but I because I'm so practiced at that, I tend to, or if I do read dialogue, what I do is I try to read it in different voices, because the idea is, when you read it out loud, do you do you want? Can you read it? Does it sound like when you read it? Does it make you pause? Does it make you go, this doesn't make sense? Because if it does that to you, it will do that to the reader, right? So reading out loud is really good for that, because you'll teach yourself where the flow of your story, if it's actually flowing the way it needs to flow. Because if it flows well, the reader's just going to go along with the ride. Because you're going to go along the ride, the reader's going to go for a ride. Something I'm going to try to do. Jonas Saul actually does this, and he reads his stuff backwards. And I'm like, why do you do that? It's like, because you can fall into the flow when you read a story, right? But if you do it like that, if you do it like if you read your story like backwards, you're seeing your craft. You're not letting yourself fall into the flow. You're just seeing the page for what it is, as much as you can. Which I think is a really brilliant way of looking at like a manuscript. So I mean, I'm going to try that. But I also have what I call an emotional draft, right? Because now I get an idea of the story I want to tell. Like I think there comes a point, like when you do this enough, okay, you're asking yourself this question. I can create whatever tension I want to create, but what's the story I'm really trying to tell here? What do I want to do with this character? Like what, like, and what is, like, what is the tension, and where do I want to go with this? Or where can the character go based on this? So, and this is something I learned from my first book that I'm actually applying to this book and every book I do hereafter is I started to simplify it. What's the story am I trying to tell? And what's the feeling I'm trying to convey? Right? Am I trying to make you think? Am I trying to make you laugh? Am I trying to make you cry? Am I trying to make you angry? Am I trying to make you go, I gotta put this down because I'm so upset with what's going on with this character? Because you're going to come back and read it at some point. I make you drop the book right there, right? You're going to come back because you want to know what happens next.
Yeah.
So so basically I do one. So basically I'm doing polish my shit draft, which is like draft 2, right? Read my draft, some of it out loud if I'm not 100% sure. Try to find the flow and consistencies, and then finally, what am I trying to make you feel? What's the story am I trying to tell here? And is this doing that? Why or why not? Or was I a genius and I did something better? Because sometimes you do things by accident, and that's great too.
Yeah, I have something I call draft 0, which is like, it's a draft nobody but me ever sees. Like draft 0 is like, okay, this is where I got everything down, but I know where all the problems are with it. So why would I bother showing that draft to anybody? So before I give a book to like beta readers or critique partners or anything like that, it's probably usually been through 2 or 3 passes of me working on it before I toss it out to say, hey, is this doing what I think it's doing? You know, because that's at the point where I'm too close to it anymore. I can't see the problems.
No, it's fair. Like, I'm blind. I cannot see where this is anymore. Can you help me? And then you'll get then you get a suggestion back. Why didn't I see this? This was so obvious.
I don't even call my first draft. It's like my 0 draft. It's like, okay, this is the bare bones of it. Now let's make it into a real story.
Yeah. So when you do like the stuff, like we were talking a little bit about this earlier, which is the concept of, okay, when you stop a story, you're not sure what you're trying to say about it, right? So is what you're saying a lot of stuff like coming, I guess maybe for lack of a better term, from your head or from your heart? Like, are you someone that likes playing a concept out and see it kind of through all the way through it? Or do you write about things you genuinely care about? Or is it somewhere in the middle? Sorry.
My story ideas usually start from like a small nugget of something that may not have any bearing on, you know, how I'll usually have an idea for an opening scene or an idea for a character, and then I don't know what the whole overarching story is going to be, and I kind of work that out over the course of a long period of time. And so like the idea, I don't usually come to a story with I'm going to write about gun control or something like that. Like that's not how I come to an idea. Like I usually have an idea about, I've got this character who's in this weird situation, and what does that imply about her or him and their world? And then from there, I start to ask myself questions about that world and what that means for the story itself, right? Especially in science fiction and fantasy, when you're world building, often, if you find yourself creating a secondary world, then you suddenly realize, I've got all these other interesting things I can play off of. And the story generally kind of, I tend to plot, I find something as a plot for a good story, and then I wind up realizing what I was trying to say about it only when it's done.
No,
so I don't start with that. I'm trying to write a story about this. I usually start with some tiny nugget that seems to have nothing to do with anything else, and then it winds up turns somehow into a novel. And I don't really know how that happens. But I do know that when I lose the interest in it, it's because I seem to be missing something at its story is missing something at its core that I'm not capable of bringing out yet.
So okay, so for me, 2 books I wrote. I wrote my first novel, The Cloud Divers. The idea I had for it is, what if the cloud today becomes our archaeology tomorrow? Right, the digital cloud. And I thought, that's an interesting idea. All right, yeah. And probably the truth, actually. And I mean, can you imagine what our ancestors or our forebears or our progeny from hundreds of years is going to look at us like we're insane? And probably was right. Like we were crazy, right? How we looked at the world. It's like, why did they do that? I'm not sure they even knew. And sometimes the answer is, you're right, we have no clue. But we just did it.
Well, you'll also have no clue because you'll have no way. Like I have old floppy disks, like from back in the 80s and early 90s. And I don't even have the machine that will read those things anymore, right? Like as a digital archaeologist, what kinds of devices are you going to have to build, because the hardware to read those things is just gone, right?
And I talk about that in the story a little bit. But I mean, like, I know, like in the future, how are you going to explain Pez? Seriously, like, how are you going to explain Pez to somebody in the future, or a Slinky, or right? I mean, this sounds silly, but I mean, I had a wonderful thought when I wrote one of my I did an epic poetry story, and I had them go through a dumpster, and they looked at a Pez, and I thought, and I had this really, really great idea, and it occurred to me, some of these archaeological things we find from other races and cultures, what if they're not what we think they are? What if they were simply what we do with our kids, their toy, and when they bought them something to amuse them? And I thought, that's a wonderful thought. And I love that thought so much, I incorporated it, and I used Pez. Pez looks like this monstrous thing. There's an animal missing everything on the inside. Like, what the hell is that? And yet, once upon a time, like, again, explaining that in the future to somebody, I mean, you're not going to be able to do that. But that's a wonderful thing about us, is there are some things that you think about it like that. It's like, we're not that different no matter what point in history we're in, and I think that's a really cool thing. But where I was going with that story, though, what I ended up writing in the novel, and I realized I was able to write it relatively quickly, because what it was really about, when you got right down to it, is about somebody ready to get out of their comfort zone, which isn't too different than the author writing it, right?
Yeah.
And I realized that at that moment, that there's I think one of the biggest things, we tell our own stories in our stories, whether we don't consciously do it or not. There's a part of us in there, and I think that's and it makes sense to me too, because no matter what we talk about, like science fiction and fantasy, meta stories are a dangerous trap if you're not careful about them, right? But the thing is, I mean, they're part of the genre. They're part of what people expect in those stories. But the thing about that is, right? If you don't have that, I think that little piece of yourself in there, I'm not sure you could actually do the story justice. That doesn't mean you get it all right technically, but technical errors are easier to fix than I guess the soul of the story, because what we bring to it is ourselves. It's not the story we're telling, right? It's who we are in the telling of it. I think because that's the one thing that's unique to each and every story. It's us.
Yeah, you're always going to bring yourself and your own experiences and your way of viewing the world to your writing, and you're never going to be able to extract yourself from your writing. And I think that's why most, they tell you, like, why are you the particular person to be writing this particular story? Often because you're the only person who could.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually probably the best piece of advice that you can give to anybody listening and watching this right now. When you look at your story, why are you the only one that can tell it? Because if you can answer that question, you have your pitch. You actually do find your pitch somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah. And I'm actually really careful, like as an editor, I'll get people writing stories about other cultures, and it's clear to me as an editor that they have not actually done their research on those cultures. And I get really careful about buying a story written by, say, a white person about a culture that they clearly haven't lived in. And so sometimes you aren't. That's the other thing to be careful. Sometimes you want to tell a story, but you may not actually be the right person to tell that particular story.
At the very least, at the moment you want to tell it, right?
Yeah.
I think anyone can tell any story. I just think sometimes it's like, okay, if I'm going to tell a story about a native culture, then maybe it stands to reason I research that native culture, right? I may not be able to tell that story the same way as someone from that culture did, but at the same token, I might be able to tell something entertaining, right? And it depends on, but at the same token, right? You can't just. I think we're past the age of, at least in storytelling, of marginalizing any particular group or race. I mean, it's a lot more apparent now than it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I just read a friend of mine actually read a very old story describing people from different color. It's very, very, it wouldn't be acceptable today. But that was what was published back in in early novels. Like, can you imagine doing a white person description like this? So I tweeted back to her a white person version of description of a white person, because it's like, I can do that and get away with it. But I mean, we've come, in some ways we've come a long way. In others, we've still got a lot of work to do. But one of the things that's becoming more and more prevalent in fiction is there's more respect there, I think, a little bit by and large, right? I could be wrong on that, but I've just noticed that it's a lot more of a conscious thing now.
Yeah, I mean, but I still think there's a long way to go.
Oh, sure.
Especially in terms of publishing, in terms of giving people who are in the marginalized regions their own voices to tell their stories. Like, I think that's where I think publishing still falls down. So, and there's a long way to go there.
Oh, big time. The truth of the matter is, on that one, it's like, if we're talking like the big world problem right now, it's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules, and as long as same people are making the same decisions, right? There might be illusions of change in some things, but they won't actually make those changes hard until they have no choice, right? And that's true not just in publishing, that's true in everything, right? So, and we got a long way to go. And based on what happened, I'm not sure if we're going to go forward or backward on that. It'll be interesting to see what happens as we come out of the pandemic. What how things shape up. So
yeah, pandemic. I'm looking forward to getting out of that. That's for sure.
well, yeah, we're gonna like. I think it's like you can kind of see it towards the second half of the year. It's gonna open up, I think, more and more a little as time goes on. I don't know. I don't think we're gonna be in this position for as is for much longer. It's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward. I mean, there are some things that alarm me, and there are some things that um, we're going to have a very interesting 10 years, I think, because I do think, I mean, what this has opened the door for is, things are going to change. Um, Hopefully for the better. I'm like I said, I'm worried about some things. I'm worried about some things. I'm not worried about others. I look forward to some of the new opportunities that may come as a result of things as well. But this has forced the world to kind of go through a change. And I think it's up to us kind of to navigate where we really want to go with it. Because we are, as much as people hate to say this, as much as people hate to admit this, we're all in this together. And we're only going to go as far as we all choose to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was your creative process affected by lockdown?
Hell no. I released 2 books last year. I've experienced the fear of death. I kind of had my own encounter with my own mortality a long time ago, twice. Once I literally met I don't know whatever you believe. I literally came like a specter of the shadow of death a long, long time ago, and it changed kind of my whole perspective on things. I'm not saying I want to die, but I don't see death the same way a lot of other people do anymore. I see it as something that's inevitable. And I see it as something that I'm going to see again someday. And when it does come, it's going to be right to go. It's a natural part of life. I'm not meant to be here forever. And one day I am going to die. And I knew this. I came face to face with that truth a long time ago. And I went through a very unique kind of illness a few years back. And so both things the pandemic could do did not rattle me the same way at all, because I've already been through them. It doesn't make me a Superman. I'm certainly not Superman. But once you experience those things, those unknowns, and they kind of become a little bit more known to you, you can't be afraid of them the same way. You just can't. You just like, it's part of life, and you shrug and you keep going, right? That's kind of how I take it, right? And actually, the very first thing I did, honestly, the very first thought I had, and this is going to sound terrible, but it's the only way you can be in this time like this. How can I make more money in this time? Because I don't, like I said, for me, like, I've already experienced those things, that like how fragile life is. So it wasn't new to me that way. Now, some things were certainly new about this time, but that fear never really touched me.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I found I didn't want to write about anything dark. I didn't even want to watch very much dark TV. We started watching Hannibal, I think, on Netflix, and I was like, no, I'm not in the mood for this right now.
No, because what you're looking for is an escape, and a happy one. If you like something, there's a lot of reasons we go into nostalgia when we're trying to cope with stuff, because we're comfortable with it. But if you look at stuff like The Wizard of Oz, you look at stuff like Mary Poppins, you look at stuff like there are escapes into these crazy, wonderful, unique, and scary, not so scary worlds, just they're worlds that are magical in the sense that good things can happen. And when you look at sometimes when some of these things were written, like when you look at anything that came out in the 30s, for example, in the 30s, there was a Great Depression going on. People did not need to see anything about dark shit. It doesn't mean like you didn't have a good guy, bad guy story, but the tension was not grim. The tension was, you're a bad guy, you're a scumbag, and the good guy's going to come kick your ass. It was simple. People got it. People felt good because you certainly don't. You have plenty. You have plenty out there. You have plenty out there to make you feel bad, right? You don't need help from somebody else. You got it. So what the hell you want to go to entertainment for that? You're going to entertainment because you want to feel better about the world. It's natural.
Yep. Yeah. It's I did a lot of reading of fluffy books this year. So.
So for me, it was reading. My reading has gone down a lot in the last few years because I've just been doing so much creating. But I still try to read a little. I was reading just little bits of everything I normally read. My escape has always been comics. So I mean, I read some comics. That was for me. That was it. Like psychologically speaking, I had my days, but by and large, this didn't hit me the same way it hit a lot of other people. I stayed away from television. I found staying away from the media was a good idea, because that's one of those things I look at and I think you need to change somehow, some way going forward, because you're not as helpful as you could be. And I was looking at that, and I saw a lot of polarity during this time that I really did not. I tried to be optimistic, because I realized, like, in a time like this, we need hope. You need hope for the future in a time like this, because this isn't going to last forever. This is going to be this was and is a shitty time by and large, and there's a lot of bad decisions being made all the time right now. But in spite of all that, we're going to come through this one way or the other. We're not going to stay here forever. Things will change because they always do. And that's life too. The life has bad times. But when we get back to better times, we're going to appreciate them a lot more for this time. People will remember what it's like when it's a little grim.
Well, I'm looking forward to the 21st century version of the Roaring *20s.
I didn't hear that last part. Can you repeat that?
I said I'm looking forward to the 21st century version of the Roaring '20s. So,
to be perfectly honest with you, I think that's going to be the 30s, not so much the 20s, but the 30s. We're gonna have one more major upheaval. It's not gonna be plague related, but we got one more major upheaval coming in this decade, and I think it has to do with the housing. I think we're going to go through our second housing crisis sometime this year, because unless there's some interference, what's going to end up happening in the next. Here's some depressing things to consider, but when we're through that, we'll be good. Office buildings aren't going to be the same going forward. And so if you're like a metropolis like Vancouver or Toronto or Calgary, Toronto and Calgary are starting to experience this now. But everywhere else sooner or later is going to come to this point. You're a corporation and the majority of your workplace works from home. Why do you need an office building? And what that's going to do is when their leases come up in the next 3 to 5 years, they're not going to renew. Now, you're in a big city like Vancouver or Calgary. Calgary's already gone through this a little bit, but they might go through it yet again as more and more of these offices either condense or you might see a bunch of corporations in one building instead of like these giant skyscrapers for workers. So you don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
So now you're a city that pays off the taxes generated from these corporations in those buildings, and you don't have that income anymore. Where are you going to hit? You're going to hit your small businesses, and you're going to hit people's homes. That's what's going to happen, and that's the next real crisis that's going to happen, and it's going to happen before the decade's up. And at that point, we're going to have that. We're going to come to that. I'm hoping because I can see this coming. Other people can see this coming too. Once we're through that, it should be good, because at that point we'll go through that whole change, that whole dichotomy of everything changing. And to what it changes to, I don't know. But I think once we're through that, the roaring will start. But I do think this decade is going to be about change, good, bad, or indifferent. This is the decade of change. Everything we knew it came before will not. That we have known for a long time is going to evolve into something. To what, I don't know. I'm not a crystal ball. I can't see the future, but I can see the end of how we've done certain things for a very, very long time. So what will that create? What world will that create going forward? Is it a bunch of families moving into one house just to get by? Is it, or maybe we all say, you know what, we're not going to do that. We're going to knock the pricing of housing down to something where it's a living wage again. We're going to have to make those decisions as a culture. And I think that's something that I think that needs to be thought about now, because 5 years from now, when all these leases are completely up, it's going to come. Like the future's coming one day at a time, and change is coming one day at a time. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing either, right? It's about where we want to go from here. But do I think good times will come again? Absolutely. Nothing.
Yeah. It's interesting with the work from home remoteness, because like I've basically left my day job 3 years ago, and I've just sort of been, doing the writing and editing at home. Essentially, it's a work from home job. And so I went through a lot of what a lot of other people went through this year, but 2 or 3 years ago. And, I've been reading a lot of think pieces about how a lot of remote workers are discovering that it's really hard to separate their work from their home life. And I remember going through that, where suddenly I realized, hey, I've been just working 7 days a week because the computer's always here and there's always an opportunity to do some work. And I had to consciously say, okay, today is a day where I'm not actually going to be sitting in front of the computer typing. It's for something else. And I think there's going to be a reckoning as companies start to realize that they can take advantage of that. And then how are we going to protect workers from being taken advantage of, because they're just always available for work, essentially.
Well, there's that, but there's also now, I think the other thing a lot of people aren't realizing just yet is now we have another boundary, private property. This is your home. Bosses haven't been able to do anything about your home life. If I decide to come into work with my pajamas, it doesn't necessarily look professional. But on the other hand, I live here, right? Does it really matter what I look like on the screen if I'm getting the work done? Right?
Yeah, except there's a lot of companies who have these weird surveillance, requirements now. Like if you're working from home and you're our support person, you have to install this software that monitors how many breaks you're taking and whether you're actually in front of your, computer and keyloggers and those types of things. Like that's an interesting privacy issue.
And here's the thing, right? I mean, that ain't cool. I wouldn't. Like that. Like that's like unethical shit.
But I know, but some companies are requiring it already as part of, you want to sign on board. This is what you have to install on your machine.
And honestly, like that's the game, right? So I mean, this is one of these other struggles, is the work home balance. I know, like for me, I'm going to be a freelancer for the rest of my life. I'm not really interested in working for a company under those conditions, because it's dumb to me, right? I'm here to do a job. I'm not here to be your monitored social servant. It's just how I look at it. Now, I have the luxury of not having a family to support, so I can say no a lot easier than maybe some other people. But the reality of the situation is like that. Like that's the reality. Like that separation of work from home is going to have to be enforced some way, or it's going to be nasty. And I know there's going to be an adjustment period for the next, 5 to 10 years, right? And that's not to mention the fact that, I mean, housing prices are gonna skyrocket short term, and then make this crash, and right after a certain point too. I mean, we're going to go through a lot of changes over the next few years. Some of these things are going to, and in the long run, they might be great, but in the short run, there's going to be a lot of painful adjustments. I don't think every job is going to be remote forever. I think school, for example, schools will be open again at some point down the road. They're going to let people go back to school because I do think there's more value in that than say keeping your kids at home. So I do see schools are going to come back in some form or fashion. And there's still going to be jobs like construction, like what I'm doing can't be done at home. Those kind of buildings are still going to be around. Those kind of jobs are still going to be around, at least in the short term. But inevitably, like the work-home balance, right, is going to be, especially in North America, because I feel like other countries have got a bigger handle on this. Especially in North America, we've eroded a lot of our rights as workers, right? We just, due to poverty and a few other things, we've eroded a lot of this stuff, and I think that's going to come to a head at some point, sooner or later. In one sense, the pandemic has exacerbated this tremendously, and like I said, this is where the future can be really scary. Now, whether or not this goes this way or it works this way in the long run, who knows? But I do know that the pandemic was the start of the world changing. It's not going to be, even when the pandemic is over, those changes will not stop.
Yep.
Yeah. So, that I'm sorry if that's depressing, but that's what I see in the next, because we don't like, one of the things I kind of realized during this pandemic in terms of the organizations that work in this country and in the United States, we don't have a system built with any real integrity anywhere. So we have a tendency to just go with the flow as a result. So I'm going to be very curious what people will find acceptable and unacceptable going forward, and I think those buttons are going to be pushed more and more, I think, in the short term. That's me. Those are my fears going forward. Right, because I'm not sure that based on what I'm seeing, I have any faith in any system to protect anybody really, and I don't think anybody should. That's me. But at the same token, there's a lot of potential for good. Like there's a lot of good things that can come from this. I think the question I have is, what are we willing to fight for? And going forward, and I'm be curious to see how that goes. But that's
I haven't given a whole heck of a. I'm not much of a long-term thinker. I tend to be more of a tactical thinker that way. So I used to be a project manager, and I always felt if someone asked me for the forecast for the project 18 months out, I'd be like, well, I could give you one, but 3 months, the 3-month outlook is going to be accurate, and anything after the 3-month outlook is, it's kind of almost imaginary thinking because things change too quickly, right?
Absolutely. Even a projection. Here's the thing, right? A projection, no matter what kind of, even a 3-month projection, right? The farther in time you go, the less accurate it's going to be.
Yeah.
Because
I'm always really interested by people who are their job is to be a futurist and to really imagine what the future possibilities are, because it's hard to predict what any individual technology will do, or any individual make one change in the world and then see how that branches out into different possibilities.
Did you ever read Isaac Asimov's Foundation?
Yeah, a really long time ago.
So his theory was like this: one person, one thing was impossible to predict, but predicting things en masse was easy. Because and he's right in one sense. He was very right with this because predicting a large system is easier because it takes a lot longer for it to change course. You and I can change our minds right now. You could say right now, screw this conversation, I'm out. You can decide that I'm just going to take over and I'm just going to start singing a random song. I have no idea what you're going to do next, right? I don't. You're unpredictable. You have your own thoughts, feelings, ideas. And get a group of people together. Um, it's easier. It's easier in a group to figure out where the group's going to go because as a group we don't tend to be as unpredictable. Um, and that's the whole theory behind what he called psychohistory. When Seldon predicted the future, bit by bit by bit, to create the second empire. That was the concept behind it.
Yeah.
What a futurist tries to do is they try to look at trends. They try to look at kind of what's come before, and they kind of say, well, this happened, this on this, and this is where we're at. So therefore, it's this. Now, almost always it's wrong. It's almost always like it's like shooting a cannon for like trying to find that right yardage. You overshoot, you undershoot. You never find it to be exactly correct. But the idea is that that's what they do. Like that's what they're doing. Is they're taking like they're trying to predict the group en masse because it's impossible to predict an individual. And they're trying to, and they often look at what has come before because nobody looks at because history does have a tendency to repeat itself, and that's it really. It doesn't always work out. It never works out like you imagine it to be, and usually the worst scenario is never the worst, and the best scenario is never the best. The future tends to find its way somewhere else, somewhere in between.
Yeah. I'm an optimistic pragmatist about the future. I always tend to think things are going to work out, but I don't have any illusions that they will necessarily do so.
I understand. I tend to think they will work out one way or the other. My only question with the future is this: are we going to go somewhere? Are we going to go somewhere? We really want to. We go where we want to go, I think. But ultimately, the question is this: are we going there because we really want to go there, or are we going there because we are afraid of the alternative? That to me is always that's to me is what I've noticed in the last 20 years. It's like that's the question. And
or are we not going there simply because of inertia?
yeah, inertia is easy. Inertia is easy. Um, but I think of the three, that's once you realize it, that's the easiest one to correct. But you got to realize it.
Well, yeah, I'd say it's the opposite. Like, just look at the whole climate change issue. It's like a trying to turn the aircraft carrier because as a society, we've got all this inertia around, fossil fuels and how we've structured our industry and trade to be reliant on those things. But trying to get anybody to pay attention to the problem because it's such a slow moving problem, we just can't seem to get a global consensus on what to do, even though there's a really huge consensus on what to do. Trying to get a patchwork of governments to agree and move things when the inertia is there behind their own societies to just keep doing business as usual, because we won't suffer the consequences. It's going to be the consequences 2 or 3 generations from now, right? It's that I think that's a really hard problem to solve.
But there's more to it than that, though, too. Like, for example, like for the fact that we're having this conversation is in somewhat to do with the fact that of how the world works. We if you look at systems of power, if you look at why slavery existed for one very, very simple reason: power. Not power over people, but the power to have hot water, the power to turn the lights on, the power to create movement and motion. That was a form of power. If you look at oil came in about around the Civil War. And one of the big things about it is now I don't need a slave to turn the lights on. I have oil to do that. I don't need, and oil has become all encompassing. It helps grow our food. It helps power our automobiles. It helps power houses. It has created the power system we have today. So if you're going to ask us to fully change, we're going to have to sacrifice some of those comforts we've become accustomed to. That's hard. So if you're looking at it from that, if you look at it like that, also the other thing too, you look at a country like India, who's got food shortages right now, and needs those fuels and stuff to help grow their food, on top of fertilizer, on top of all the other things that they need just to have their function. We cut back on fossil fuels, they might not be able to eat right away. How do you solve that problem in the meantime to shift to something else? And then on top of that too, the fact of the matter is, it used to be that the cost of a barrel of oil would get you 100 barrels from the ground. Now it's closer to 5 or 6 barrels of oil now today, right? We are running out of time one way or the other, right? Eventually that's going to hit a 1-to-1 ratio, and then it's going to go the opposite way. And then we're done. And how we know it is going, like we can see, like, yeah, they're coming to an inevitable end, but at the same time, like getting people off, it's like almost like getting someone off a substance abuse problem. That first little bit's going to be painful, and no one wants to go through that.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's an inertial problem, because it's easier to just sort of ignore it and keep your lifestyle going than actually deal with the problem. So, like overcoming that inertia is a really huge deal. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I see that as also just more. It's not just inertia. I think it's also just that also means that the people who have been, for lack of a better term, running things in the world as we know it, are going to have to give up what they've had. And if you want to keep, and it's human nature, if we ever get to the top of something, you're ever on top, you ever make it to whatever pinnacle you ever want to make it to, the natural impulse is to keep it as long as you can.
Yeah, but I think that there's a lot of, I don't know that, there's a certain amount of change that has to happen, but I'm not sure that there are a lot of technologies coming out now that don't mean necessarily having to give up creature comfort. The cost of other forms of energy has come down so much that it's actually, more cost effective than still being reliant on oil.
Oh no, no, absolutely.
I mean, there are various places where you can't. We still haven't found a substitute for it, but there are a lot of places where we have, and we still haven't made that conversion.
No, but again, that's because that requires a shift from the very top down. And what I'm saying is, it's not just the inertia of that change over. It's also just the simple body politic of the fact that'll be a change in guard from the top all the way down. People that have been in charge for hundreds of years now, right? They're going to have to change, and it's human nature. If like for good or bad, if you ever got to the point where you had everything available to you, and you had the world literally in your hands, and you could do anything you wanted, and suddenly this has to change. Maybe you still say it changes because it makes sense. It's for your survival and for your sanity, but you're going to do that as slowly as you possibly can. You're going to make that go. You can't stop change, but you might reduce it to a crawl. And that, it's not just inertia, it's also politics that are a big part of why things are moving as slowly as they are. So, because if I have a problem, if I realize I'm just doing the same thing over and over again and I'm coming to the same result, right? And I realize it's the inertia of what I've done, then for me, it's easy to change because otherwise I'm insane. Why would I go down the same road to get the exact same result? But if unless I'm benefiting greatly from it, and when that happens, right, that's a lot harder. And that I think when you look at the world energy crisis, like that's the situation. We get this abundance from it, and you're asking to walk away from that. That seems crazy, but you are ultimately correct. There are better ways of doing things, but it wouldn't be done the same way. And change is scary. And it always is.
Well, it means certain haves become have-nots, while other people are,
Exactly.
Those people who have made a lot of money in those industries are suddenly going to, have to find something else to do.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm not sure that's initially inertia, but more like, hey, I like this, and it's human nature, right? So, but like I said, for all the good, bad, and indifference, ultimately, I do think the world does get better. Like one day at a time, I think the world does become a better place. It's just we struggle, and that's just our nature. So, but anyway, Miss Katrina.
Yeah.
I think we've had a fun conversation. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. This is good.
Okay, but before we walk, so what was your last? What are you got a release coming up, or what was your last release?
Oh, my last fantasy release was a while ago. It was The Tree of Souls. I've been releasing some romance titles under a pseudonym, so that's what kept me busy over the last year. And then I've currently got a work that's finished, but I'm trying to get it out into the traditional route. So I'm submitting to agents right now before I decide whether to self-publish or not. I think it's a fun work, but I'm seeing if I can hack it under the traditional writing banner.
So before we walk away, I'm gonna ask this. That's a fun thing. Was romance and fantasy really that different?
Yes and no. I actually started writing romance because I have another work I'm working on that has a romantic element, and I realized I didn't really know how to make that work. And if you're writing pure romance has it's a bit pat to call it a formula, but there are certain things that romance readers expect, and learning how to write to those expectations was an interesting exercise. And I found it also helped me. Like some of my early writing, people sort of assume some of the feedback has been that it's a little bit cold, but you can't write a cold romance, right? You have to be able to induce emotions in your reader. So doing that taught me a lot about how to get more of an emotional punch out of my fantasy writing. So it was a good exercise to do. And they're different genres, and readers have different expectations from those genres. But it's all about learning how to write to those expectations, or to subvert those expectations as well, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to.
No, I bring
different.
Sorry, I bring this up because a long time ago I wrote something called The Modern Day Percival, and one of the things I learned when I was researching that essay was that romance is actually where fantasy comes from. They're not the same genre, but without romance there wouldn't be fantasy. And I was just curious based on the fact that that you went down that road. It's like, where were they the same? Where were they different? Because it's like that seems like the differences seem obvious, but it's also they're a lot more nuanced today than they were, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But yeah, it's just interesting to see. So you're gonna write more romances?
Oh yeah, in fact, even when I get back to fantasy, almost all the stories that I write have some sort of romantic element to them. It might not be the focus of the stories, but I like those character relationships, and yeah, there's I think there's always going to be a little bit of romance in the stuff that I put out.
There's nothing wrong with that. Romance. Yeah, I mean, in this time, why not? Especially now.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah. Okay. So, So I guess I should ask this: do you want to plug your romances, or I mean, I'm not. I realize it's a different name and different student. That's why I'm asking. Otherwise, plug your editing, like whatever you want to plug here. But I'm just offering.
Well, I do want people to go check out littlebluemarble.ca, which is it's a small. It's a very niche climate fiction magazine, but we pay authors pro rates for their short stories, and that's sort of my contribution to the climate fight is trying to littlebluemarble.ca.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and so that's where when I'm not writing, that's where my major focus is on getting that out there, because there's a lot of great climate journalism, and I do feel like I compete with that. But I think telling people stories is a way to engage their emotions on the problem, and so that's what Little Blue Marble is there for. To sort of envision better futures, or help people envision what might be coming, all that kind of.
Well, it's the best stuff. It's the best. Actually, truthfully, climate journalism is one of the last really good frontiers of journalism today, because it is there's some really interesting reads out there. But anyways, how can people find you if they want to get your editing services? If they want to, how would you do that?
You can mail me. My ganashmedia.com is my publication house and editing site, and katrinaarcher.com is my writing site. So that's sort of my home on the web.
So Katrina Archer, because that one's easy to spell.
Yeah.
So just give it your other one here so people can find you.
Can I post in this chat? I don't seem to have a box to post in the chat.
I don't know. I think you can. It should be on the right. Can you see the correct comments are?
I'll put it on the. Yeah, I can see the chat comments, but I can't see a box. I'll post it in the private chat, and then you can maybe repost it to the full one.
Yeah, just do that, or yeah, I happily do that.
There we go. You see that one?
I do. So we'll just do that. Because I am smart enough to do copy and paste, ladies and gentlemen. I'm
in the process. I'm actually in website hell. I'm upgrading all my sites right now. So that's when I get off the call. That's what I'm going to be doing, is upgrading all my sites.
No, I can relate to your pain. I have to do something very similar myself, and it's like I don't want to. I just don't, and I know the longer I wait, the worse it's going to be. I'm going to be SEOing my site up a little bit more, because I actually have understood that a little bit since. But anyway.
Oh, and I'm not precious about my pen name. So I write the romance under. Oops, let me type that right.
So.
That's my pen name for the contemporary romance.
I've actually heard of you.
Have you?
Yes. So I'll let you know a little secret. I actually have a really big soft spot for romance writers, because I do genuinely feel that it's an underappreciated part of fiction, in the sense of it gets all the financial. It's a big financial driver to the publishing industry, and they often do not get the credit for it.
A lot of people sort of they treat it as like the redheaded stepchild of publishing almost. They don't give it as much of a, it doesn't get serious criticism. or it's treated simply as women's fiction, so that makes it somehow less,
well,
less interesting.
it's silly to me because okay, so
But I'm also
essentially,
really like I sort of got into it on a lark, but it's also interesting to me how many men actually read romance. You
well,
know,
well, it's well, see, it's because so I'll let you in like a little fun thing, right? It's just like you're gonna figure this out at some point. It's like, you know what? How the heck am I going? I'm going to figure out how to fulfill a lot of what you're doing, and what I figured out with romance is, and if I might blush like a schoolboy here, so I'm that'll be funny, but that's for a lot of women I've been romantic with. There's a fantasy element to it. There's a legitimate fantasy element to being with a woman, and you got to fulfill that to some degree. I'm not saying that necessarily romance is the way necessarily to do that, the romance novel, but it's interesting to get into that. It's interesting that way. But more importantly, it's an art form. Like honestly, like anything else, any other form of fiction. I mean, there's good romance, there's bad romance, there is a quality to it, and being able to do it well is an art form. It's not something anybody can just walk up and do. You have to learn. Um, Somebody I rate it's kind of at the borderlines, Alana Andrews. She's borderline romance slash, but she straddles that border between romance and fantasy.
yeah. Well, her books are really good, though. I've read a few of her books.
No, the voice. Actually, it's a husband and wife team that actually write that. Right? So
I know.
Yeah, and those two have those voices, the Kate Daniels stuff in particular, has an incredibly strong voice, right? And all the characters like pop and they speak, and everything they do in there, everything is well thought up, well done, well crafted. Um, I see someone like I have friends in the romance industry. MJ Colette's a great writer. She's awesome. Like she's an amazing talent. Elisa Palmer is really good at what she does, right? Those are two people I know and respect. And then the other thing I really enjoy is getting the older romance writers. Oh, they make me blush so hard. They make me blush so hard because they don't do anything anymore. It's like fuck it, let's get to the good stuff. But the thing is, I had an opportunity and I noticed I had an opportunity through the Romance Writing Association in Calgary, and there's some great people. I mentioned a few of them. Tammy Lynn Carbo, if you're watching or listening, that includes you. They opened up the door, and I went in. I went in there with no expectations, and I was very pleasantly surprised by how intelligent, incredibly thoughtful, skilled. It's an underappreciated genre with a lot of underappreciated people in it, and I feel that it's not all of it's for me. I'm not going to say that, but I can respect the fact that this exists.
Yeah.
Right. I can respect the fact that there are people who are really good at it, and I can respect the fact that those voices matter. Like right, and it should not be disrespected. I can't make a sock sound sexy. I know some women that can definitely do that. It sounds funny, but it's so true, right? That's a skill. It really is, and you have to have your props to it, like you really do. So.
Yeah. So anyway, it was an enjoyable little sidetrack for me that I gotta write short little. They're not full. They're novellas right now. They're not full novels, but they keep me busy. And so yeah.
Well, hey, listen, it's all good. Hey, listen, I think, like I said, I get it. It's all good. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. If at the very least give romance writers, if you're into that kind of thing, don't be shy. Some of them are really good. Some of them really, really are, including Saskia Lane, aka Katrina Archer. Right? So definitely check them out. And that'll do it for this episode of Just Joshing. If you guys want to support this podcast, you can do so a bunch of different ways. Hit the follow button on my Twitch. I have the followers, but I always can use more. hit YouTube channel at Josh Pentel Wrestling. Subscribe there. I got books for sale if you guys want to do that. But either way, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Stay inspired. Keep shining in the dark. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye.